It's Wednesday, July 10th. My name is Ashton Ellett, here with another installment of the Senate Staff Oral History Project, sponsored by the Richard B. Russell Library for Political Research and Studies at the University of Georgia. I'm here today in Washington, D.C. with Mr. Ralph Petta. Ralph Petta III, I believe.
Yeah, the third.
A New York native, he earned his bachelor's degree from Syracuse University's Maxwell School. Upon graduation, Mr. Petta moved to Washington, D.C., where he joined the personal staff of Senator Sam Nunn of Georgia, where he served in a number of roles, including legislative assistant. In 1987, he left Capitol Hill and joined the American Association of Equipment Lessors, which is now called the Equipment Leasing and Finance Association. ELFA? Is it ELFA or ELFA?
ELFA I prefer,
ELFA.
but some people call it Alpha. ELFA.
Over the span of 36 years, Mr. Petta worked his way up the ranks, becoming Chief Operating Officer in 2010 and President and CEO in 2016. He retired in December 2023. Mr. Petta, Ralph, thank you so much for joining me here, fighting the traffic, swimming upstream to get here. And thank you, as always, to Randy Knuckles for setting us up here at Denton's on K Street.
Yes, thank you. It's nice to meet you, Ashton.
Oh, it's great to meet you finally. We're able to get together. Well, tell me. Let's start at the beginning. Tell me about growing up in upstate New York, Syracuse.
Oh, where do you start?
That's right.
Central New York is very different than downstate New York, as you can imagine. Syracuse, New York, born and raised there, big family, 4 sisters. I'm the oldest. Mm-hmm. And went to grade school there, went to high school there at Bishop Ludden.
So grew up in a Catholic family.
Grew up in a Catholic family.
Sure.
Little known fact, our high school basketball team was rated the #1 team in New York State.
Really?
Yeah, 1969 and 1970. #1 of all of New York State. Downstate, New York City, Lutheran of Long Island was a powerhouse basketball team. Anyway, I was a junior and rode the bench as a junior, but I got to play with all these luminaries in high school that went on to...
So what you're telling me is you got brutalized in practice.
Pretty much.
Okay.
We got beat up in practice, but playing on a #1 team in the state, we were undefeated, 22-0.
Wow.
The Green Machine.
The Green Machine.
Bishop Ludden Green Machine. We were modeled after the Boston Celtics. Red Sox, Bruins.
Yeah, right.
And we had the Gaelic green outfits and the high socks, the short shorts. My friends make fun of every picture.
Did you wear Chuck Taylors?
Chuck Taylors, black Chuck Taylors was the signature footwear. Those things were the most uncomfortable things you could possibly put on your feet.
Took the words right out of my mouth. Like a lot of arch support there with the Chuck tees.
There were no arch support. Now you pay $250 for a pair of shoes, and you've got all kinds of orthotics. Anyway, so went on from there at Bishop Ludden High School, and went to Syracuse University, which was 2 miles from my house. Lived at home for my first year, which was the major mistake in my life, is living home and going to college. I prevailed upon my folks to allow me to move up to campus, 2 miles away on campus. So I did that, and for 3 years lived at Syracuse University. I was in a fraternity for the last 2 years, my junior and senior year, and had a great experience. Studied political science at the Maxwell School, which is a pretty prestigious place back then and even now. And so I always had this passion about electoral politics, and political science was always something that I was very interested in.
Did that come from was it a family interest, or was this sort of your peculiarity?
I was just going to say, my mother, being brought up in a Catholic environment, an Italian Catholic environment, my mom, of course, wanted me to be a priest first. And then when she realized that wasn't going to work out for whatever reason, then, of course, you have to be a doctor. Well, enrolling in biology and chemistry in my first year at Syracuse University in a liberal arts program completely and irrevocably disabused me of that notion. So I got the hell out of, can I say that?
Yeah, we are. Oh yeah, you can say whatever you want.
Of science and biology, and realized I really was more interested in reading and sociology and history and politics. I was always very interested in what was going on in Washington and the various personalities up here back in the 60s. And of course, there were tumultuous times back in the 60s with all the craziness, particularly in the latter half of the 60s. So I went to Syracuse University, and the Vietnam War was in progress. And I had a low draft number. You had to take a draft number. Even though you had a college deferment, I had a low draft number. You still had,
what was your, do you remember what your number?
85. So I was thinking the way things were going during the war, that when I graduated college, I was going to be subject to the draft. And 85 was low enough that if they got to 85, which they did in prior years, then I would have had to go. And I was really extremely nervous about that prospect. Well, fast forward, they stopped conscription and the draft ended right around the time I graduated college in 74. I graduated in 74. I forget the exact date, but that they stopped. But the war was winding down. I didn't have to worry about being drafted and shipped off to Vietnam. Parenthetically, one of my colleagues, I don't know, I think you've interviewed Arnold Panaro. I finally, now that I'm retired, I finally got around to reading his first book.
Yeah.
And what fascinated me, I haven't told Arnold this, I haven't seen him in a while, but what fascinated me was his recounting of his experience in Vietnam.
Incredibly powerful.
Unbelievable. And I kind of knew some of the bits and pieces of it, but reading the story as he related it in his book and what he went through and what Vietnam was like, and of course he was injured and one of his comrades was killed, and all of that made a big impact on me. I mean, reading the book, it just kind of brought me back to, boy, I dodged a bullet, literally, figuratively. So anyway, graduated in 1974, kicked around a little bit in Syracuse for a while for a lot of reasons that I don't want to even go into because it would take way too long. I moved to Washington, D.C. and pursued trying to get a job on Capitol Hill.
What was the catalyst for finally convincing you to and obviously we don't have to get into why you stayed, but what convinced you that you wanted to try your hand in D.C. as opposed to moving to the city?
Well, there was not a lot going on in Syracuse, New York. The job market was horrible.
Sure, this is the mid-70s, right?
Mid-70s, job prospects were nil. And I had a pretty well-connected family in Republican circles in central New York. And so I had a couple of interviews with some of the local politicians. They're sort of informational interviews. And I thought, what I really had an interest and passion about as I thought about it was working on Capitol Hill.
Okay.
What would that be like, working on Capitol Hill? So I moved to Washington. I got married, and my wife at the time was here, her family was here in Washington. So it made it a little easier.
Sure.
And I kind of parlayed some interviews that people that they knew, and anyway, what eventually happened was I, with my resume, walked around Capitol Hill and just started throwing resumes around and talking to people, and I filed my resume with the personnel office of I don't know if it was the Senate or the House or just one centralized.
I'm sure there were two of them. They always do things differently in the House and the Senate.
Well, so I just had my resume, and lo and behold, I get a call from Senator Nunn's office. They were looking for a junior person to tote the mail and just do very administrative, menial.
We're talking entry level.
Entry level. I had no experience doing anything. I painted. I worked construction. I worked in the parks. As a high school and college kid. There was no go off and spend a summer in Tibet or the Bahamas or Cancun, or all these international things that kids do now, and students kind of go here and there. There wasn't all that travel component to your off time in the summers, so you had to work whatever you could find. So my family was not very well off, so I had to always work and make money to kind of support myself. So I get this call from Senator Nunn's office, and I just went up, had the interview, and I was hired. And I didn't know much about Senator Nunn or what his politics were. I fast learned about it, but I'll just say now that it was pretty much a life-changing experience for me. First of all, the fact that they gave me this opportunity, and Senator Nunn would call me the staff person from northern Georgia. because I didn't sound
far north Georgia.
North Georgia. I didn't really sound like many of my other contemporaries and colleagues.
I know exactly what you mean.
Right. But working in the office was wonderful. The relationships that I had made, the friendships of the other guys and women on the staff. We would play softball together. We would, hang out together, learning all we could about the electoral process, the political process, how things worked on the Hill. And, I could have gotten a job with Mary Sue Smith on the House side, first term. But instead, I got a job with this up and coming, by then, this was 1978, so he had been in the Senate for 6 years, right? He was elected first in 72. And already in 1978, when I first came on the scene, he was a pretty well-respected, established person on the Hill. So that's kind of how it started, and I went and did all kinds of things. It started from, as I say, toting the mail. Then you move up to be a legislative correspondent.
Okay.
So the legislative correspondent answers the mail, and you get all kinds of mail from.
So now you get to open the mail.
So now you instead of just walking it around, you get to open it. Well, there was a machine that actually opened the mail, right? And so you're
learning all the secrets today.
Yeah, exactly. Imagine that, a machine.
Right.
If there wasn't somebody sitting in the corner with a letter opener, because there would be hundreds and thousands of.
Talk about repetitive motion injuries.
Yes, exactly. So there were form letters.
Yeah.
Then there was also, you had to learn the issues, which I gravitated to. I loved, so how does he feel about this particular issue? What is his position on this issue? And so you had to do a little bit of research, who's for, who's against it. And so you draft this letter. If you draft this response, if the incoming letter was something that was a little bit more nuanced or esoteric. If somebody was just writing in about abortion, there's a canned response. Back in those days, Senator Nunn caught a lot of flack because he voted for the Panama Canal Treaty.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
And so we would get thousands and thousands of these little postcards. And they were all formed, as you know.
We have Senator Talmadge's papers at the Russell Library. I know exactly the boxes you're talking about.
Gosh.
Just thousands of these things.
They'd come in a bag, an orange bag, and we dump the orange bag on the table, and there'd be these postcards. Now, I guess folks at the time, they still do, you petition, you're a member of Congress about an issue you care strongly about. Well, in these cases, the Panama Canal issue, these things were pre-printed. They just put their name on it, and they, sent it in. And, well, he ended up voting for the treaty, and all of the Georgia constituency, pretty much, didn't want him to support that treaty. It was the whole, you probably heard this, we used to have the Panama Canal, now we have none. None. So they were upset about that, but this, I think, was an example of something he felt very strongly about, and he decided, the guy would just do an unbelievable amount of analysis, research, homework to figure out where do I need to be on this? What are the pressure points? Obviously, he was a tremendous patriot. He was somebody who cared about national security, foreign policy. He immersed himself in that stuff. So he had a pretty good reason for wanting to turn the Panama Canal back to the Panamanians.
Walk me through the mechanics of how you go from Senator Nunn, who does his homework, does his reading, formulates his opinion, and how that message is communicated down to you, the legislative correspondent.
Well, you'd read everything that you could get your hands on. We would meet with Senator Nunn every so often. It wouldn't be a lot. I mean, there was a little bit of...
there were some layers between you
and
the
senator. Yes, there were some layers. Yeah, when I first... there was a legislative director. Now, Randy, that was here a second ago, Randy Knuckles, was basically my boss at the time when I was in the legislative. He came a little later than I did. Gordon was really the first legislative director during my time. And
that's Gordon Giffen.
Gordon Giffen, yeah. And then Gordon left, and then there's a series of other folks. But you sort of move up from a legislative correspondent, answering the mail, and you not only by osmosis, but being in the office, knowing people, knowing the staff, putting your ear to the wall, you knew where Senator Nunn stood on all these issues. Plus, he had responses for all these things, so you learned where he was on these, whether they're esoteric issues or mainstream kinds of issues that everybody would talk about at the time. So from there, I just kind of kept my nose to the grindstone and moved up to be a legislative assistant. And so I actually handled legislative issues in certain functional areas.
So what was your portfolio?
So mine was, obviously the Armed Services was all Armed Services Committee. They had a separate staff. We had a liaison in our personal staff, Arnold Panaro, and Jeff Record, who were the connections to the Armed Services Committee, although Arnold went to the staff of the committee later on.
Right.
But he was on the personal staff to begin with. So that was a whole separate.
Sure.
Mine, I handled civil service, the Government Affairs Committee of the Senate, transportation, which was huge in Atlanta.
Oh, sure.
And labor issues, some communications issues.
They put the Italian guy from New York on labor. I think you were. You were stereotyped.
Well, I'm going to tell you this. I'm going to tell you this real quick story, okay? And Randy says he already told you this story, but I don't think he did. I was meeting with a bunch of union folks from Fort Stewart.
Okay.
And these were civilians from Fort Stewart. They came up. They wanted to meet with Senator Nunn about some labor issue. On the base, there was something, I forget exactly what it was. And so I was the person who was going to meet with them. Now, Senator Nunn was going to come in if he could. He was going to drop in, but you know how that is. Guy's very busy. So I'm meeting with 18 of these folks, and they're pretty nice to me, but they're hammering me on the issue because they thought that there was a chance Senator Nunn was not going to support this when it came up. So they're hammering me. I'm trying to be nice, I'm doing all this, and I said, I only have, I've got another meeting in 30 minutes, but I will absolutely relay your concerns to Senator Nunn when I see him about this particular matter. Okay, fine. Well, 30 minutes comes up, the door opens, and there's Randy Knuckles. And Randy peeks his head through the door and he says, Ralph, your 11 o'clock appointment was canceled, so you're fine. So, and he goes back out. So now I have to sit there. That was my out, was I got to leave at 11 o'clock because I have another appointment. Well, so anyway, that was a little, Randy reminds me of that every time we get together. Hey, remember when I did that? Yeah, I remember very well. So I ended up another 30 minutes with these folks beating me up about whatever the issue was. Anyway, so those, but the very, to me, the interesting thing that I did, the substantive issue that I handled for Senator Nunn had to do with the transportation in and around Atlanta.
Sure.
So, in fact, Senator Nunn would always kid me, and he wrote me, as I was leaving the Senate, he wrote me a note that alluded to the Talmadge Bridge. Because the Talmadge Bridge replacement was a huge funding issue in
Several
Georgia.
files on this in Senator Nunn's papers up at Emory.
Oh, really?
So,
okay.
yeah.
Okay, great. Well, we met for years about getting funding for the Talmadge Bridge. I would meet with officials in Atlanta. Tom Moreland was the commissioner of the DOT. So, I mean, that guy, he was either his or his emissary was in Washington a lot. We would go to Atlanta, meet with him.
Who was tougher, the union guys or Tom Moreland?
Tom could be a real hard, crusty guy. Nice guy, really nice guy, but, he's kind of, looks at you and, well, we're going to get this funding done, aren't we, this year? So it was sort of a multi-year thing.
Sure.
And it kind of gave me a window into understanding how things got done. Now, this was an appropriations more than anything else. So it wasn't, we basically had to get appropriations for the bridge attached to the transportation appropriations legislation every year. And the state would put up money, the feds would put up money, and the Corps of Engineers in Atlanta and Savannah particularly, and the Ports Authority would be able to dredge the harbor and essentially build the bridge, which I guess finally got done in the early 90s. Mm-hmm. So I left in 87. They finally got enough money and built a thing in I don't know, early 90s is when it was completed.
And now we need a taller one.
Yeah, now I understand.
Yeah, with the Port of Savannah, Garden City, and how much shipping, containerized shipping comes through. We can't get the biggest ships in because the bridge is too low, which is amazing. Yeah. Because it is a very big bridge. But
so what's that? 20
you're retired now. You could probably lend your services and get some more.
Just what I want to do. But it was a wonderful experience because I got to know a lot of the local people in Atlanta. I would get to meet with them there and here, and in Savannah. MARTA was being expanded out towards the airport.
That's right.
Then, and so we needed funding, matching federal funds to be able to extend the line out to the airport and beyond. So, and of course the transportation around the highway system around Atlanta and through it, 85, 75, all of that was in the process of being expanded and widened.
Yes, that was during the period known as freeing the freeways, because they had finished them in 78, 79, and as soon as they finished them, they realized they didn't have enough capacity.
Right.
So that was you.
That was me. Yeah, right. That was me. But with Senator Nunn not being on any of those authorizing committees, I was kind of the guy that would have a little bit more free reign, and I would just kind of update him on, okay, here's where this thing is going, here's where the bill is, so and so came in and we met with so and so. You always wanted to keep on top of what was going on. Transportation issues in metropolitan Atlanta and beyond were huge back then.
So I guess this would have been in the 80s, so Senator Talmadge wouldn't have been in office anymore. How much interaction did you have? Because I think Senator Mattingly was on a PROPS, or at least military construction, MILCON subcommittee. How much interaction did you have? Because he would have obviously been in the majority party at this time.
Yeah, that was 1980.
Right.
Right. The thing I'll say about that is that 1980 was 2 years that I had been in the Senate. That was cataclysmic. What occurred in 1980 with the Reagan Revolution. When I came into the Senate in 1978, Senator Nunn was the Armed Services, its seniority on the Armed Services Committee. We were in the majority. All of a sudden, 1980 comes. Talmadge is out, and Mattingly is in, and it's like, who is this guy? And relationships between the two staffs were a little prickly to begin with.
Sure.
Because it wasn't, Randy came from Talmadge's office and others, but it wasn't like open hostility or anything, but there was a little bit of uncomfortable feelings between the majority and the minority, Mattingly and Nunn, Senator Nunn being the statesman, he had already been there, as I say, now 8 years when the Reagan Revolution occurred. The Senate lost 12 seats. So the Senate turned Democrat to Republican. They lost 12 seats, the Democrats, and all of a sudden the calculus on the Hill changed. Everything changed. Committee assignments changed. Right. The size of your apportionment changed. The size of your offices changed. We ultimately got along with Mattingly's people, and he was an okay person. I don't know that he set the world on fire, and I don't know that he always felt that he was operating under the wings of Senator Nunn, who was sort of in Georgia parlance. He was a very well-respected guy and with a lot of knowledge. But they did some things with respect to getting funding for transportation, but because we had a head start in '78 when I came on, and into the late '70s and the early '80s, when this thing was really heating up, we never really ran into Mattingly staff too much with this, even though they were in the majority.
Sure.
But it kind of started with Nunn, and the Democrats were respected, to a great degree. So a lot of this got done into the '80s, and
right.
then, as I say, with all kinds of transportation issues, highways, MARTA, all of that, the highway system. But there was a good relationship between the two staff, and they got along. I mean, Senator Nunn, when all is said and done, he's a gentleman. He's a really solid citizen. He's not going to let this partisan politics kind of get in the way, unless it meant something, momentous.
Right.
But the fact that Mattingly came in and he was a Republican, Nunn was, Southern Democrat. Nunn was always, I always thought that Senator Nunn was kind of a center-right guy.
Sure.
I mean, he wasn't, Talmadge, I'm not making light of where Senator Talmadge was and his father. But Nunn was a little bit more enlightened, I would say, and his positions, he was a little center when he needed to be center. He was a little bit more conservative when he needed to be conservative, but it was never anything that was going to ruffle the feathers of folks back home.
He was a Georgia Democrat.
He was a Georgia Democrat. That's right. And I mean, he was always about balancing the budget. He was always about keeping spending down. Very conservative in that respect.
Yeah.
But he had some social proclivities, that his issues on abortion and some of those other hot button issues were more, center, and so he, I think, really did well in Georgia politically, and people really supported Senator Nunn as a person. As I say, he was a gentleman. He was just a really very sharp, smart guy. One of my first assignments when I came to the Hill was to pick him up from the airport.
Ooh.
And drive him to the airport and stay late nights. We all had to take turns staying late nights when the Senate was in.
Sure.
Voting late in the evening. And so there were times he would have to go to a social function or what have you, and some of the junior people like me would have to go and hang out and take him home or drive him to the airport or from the airport to home or what have you. That job was taken over by another even more junior person than I was after a couple of years, which was kind of nice. But so you get to know him a little bit, having just conversations with him, and whether it was about substantive issues or just sports or whatever.
Right.
He was a basketball player. So we would organize these basketball games against other Senate staff. And Senator Nunn played with us a couple of times. And it was a hoot. It was great. And he still, whenever I see him, I don't see him very often at all. But when I would see him over the years, he would always mention, playing ball. And it was just, we played for Senator Holling's staff, and he'd be tearing down the court and take that 20-foot jump shot, just like he did in high school. So it was really, it was kind of cool. And so you get to see another side of him. He's not this serious-minded, owlish, Senator Nunn used to have those owl glasses.
But you're right. That is the persona. If you see a snap of him or something at a committee hearing, he's this pensive, owlish,
right,
scholarly.
Yeah. He was all those things. But I mean, he was 2 kids. He was a great father. Colleen they'd have us to his house for Christmas dinners. They'd have the staff, and they were just really very nice, warm people. It was terrific. It was the best experience. Now I don't have a lot of jobs in my career. In fact, I have 2 jobs. One in the Senate for 9 years, and the other at the Trade Association for 36.
Right.
So now within each of those offices, I did a bunch of things. And as you pointed out in the opening, at the Equipment Leasing and Finance Association, I started out running one program. And from there, just was immersed in everything that the association had done over the years. So I learned all these various aspects of what a trade association was all about, including running the foundation. We had a foundation. So
it's really very similar in that. I'm not saying you started as the male guy at the ELFA, but you worked your way up through the organization, which is I don't want to say old fashioned, but is of a time. At the time, that is how you grew and developed.
That's right.
Your professional career.
Right. Not so much anymore.
Right. Well, there are some places, I suppose. Yeah. But yeah, you're right. It is less common. Mm-hmm. We were talking about Senator Mattingly in Georgia, and one of the issues that I know was really important to Senator Mattingly and what shows up in his records is the Martin Luther King holiday. Mm. And I think I can recall seeing it on Senator Nunn's papers as well, that was an issue that you helped cover and do some correspondence with.
I was there at the time. There was a woman on the staff, Sylvia. What was her last name? Sylvia used to harangue Senator Nunn about the MLK holiday. Now, that was a prickly issue, as you can imagine. I met Coretta Scott King on a number of occasions. She would come to Washington. She'd be, meeting with Senator Nunn about a variety of issues. Most importantly, this one, the holiday. Senator Nunn was a little uncomfortable about establishing another federal holiday. His conservative bona fides kind of raised themselves. Do we need another holiday? Lost productivity, in the effect on the economy, all this kind of stuff. Which, you figure, is he really going out of his way to manufacture reasons for not voting for it? So it created a little bit of some consternation, I think, between Senator Nunn and some of the minority populations in Georgia. But it became it passed. It became law, and I don't think people are looking back. So she would come to the office. Met with her. She was a wonderful woman. She'd have an entourage. My other favorite, as I'm thinking about this, person who would lobby Senator Nunn is Ted Turner.
Oh, so yes.
Ted Turner would show up, and I was handling communications issues. So there was this big FCC deregulation bill back in the day. And Ted Turner would come up, and he would walk in the office, biggest personality. Normally you walk in a U.S. Senate office, you're kind of subdued, you
get your Coke and your peanuts.
Yeah, get your Coke and your peanuts. You go and you sit, you wait for the senator to come out, or the staff person, and all this kind of stuff. He'd walk in, the door would swing open, he'd have a couple of people with him, and he'd shake his hand and move, he'd shake your hand, and it was just this really huge dynamo of a guy. And then Senator Nunn would come out from his office, Sam, and he'd slap Senator Nunn in the back, and Senator Nunn, he'd look him in the eye, and they'd do this thing. The guy was just priceless. He was, and as I got to see him on TV and interviews later on, and he was just a very, very interesting guy. And they collaborated on national security stuff later on. But it was I think he knew Turner for a long time, being in Georgia politics.
Sure.
But meeting him in that kind of a big bombastic personality, so it was great. It was terrific.
Well, as we were talking about how you work your way up through the organization, obviously the next step would have been legislative director, but you decided in I guess it was 1987 or so, to step away and to take another job opportunity, which you mentioned. Walk me through that process of how you made that transition from Capitol Hill to the association.
Well, after having been there for maybe 6 years, or 7 years,
which is a very long time for a staffer.
Given the typical longevity on the Hill, it was pretty good stretch. One of the things that went into this decision was you made no money working on Capitol Hill. I guess
especially in a Georgia office.
Especially in a Georgia office. Senator Nunn, love him, but what he would do is he'd take his pot of money, and you could either spread the pot of money and hire a lot of people and pay them a little, or hire a few people and pay those few people a lot. Well,
a lot being very relative.
Well, he chose get more people and pay him a little, and because he had staff offices in the state that he had to support as well. And then he would make a big deal, being the economic conservative that he is, to say to the people back home, hey, I returned X amount to the Treasury. I didn't use all my staff resources. So, we were struggling, young staff people, making a little money, and parenthetically, some of how we used to eat in the evening was to go to fundraisers and find out where the fundraiser is and then crash the fundraiser. Well, it wouldn't be Senator Nunn's. It would be Strom Thurmond's, or it would
didn't
be
matter
Fritz
who.
Holloway. We didn't care. But you knew who the good ones were.
Being a Hill staffer is a lot like being a graduate student.
I think you're right. And my crony and I, we would, crash one of those fundraisers. That's how you had a glass of beer and you had a couple of things to eat and you're fine. Anyway, all this is to say that at some point along the way, for reasons, you want to have a family, married, all this kind of stuff, it occurred to me that I probably ought to be looking around. I'd been here now for a number of years, and I looked at the environment and found that people were working in corporate and trade organization, trade organizations in kind of government affairs capacities. And I had known the Earl Leonards and the Connell Staffords and those folks who used to lobby Senator Nunn. And I thought, well, I'm going to keep my eyes and ears open, because I think it's probably time to be thinking. I was in my 30s then, to think about my career. It's great here, it's great, but what happens next? So I was lobbied by this guy that I had met several times. I forgot the issue that he was lobbying Senator Nunn about, but he's from IBM. Okay. And we struck up a relationship and a friendship, and he ultimately heard of this job at the American Association of Equipment Lessors. Equipment lessors is the leasing industry. It's the equipment leasing industry in the United States. It's leasing Boeing 707s, 727s, industrial manufacturing, all types of equipment that you would use in a commercial setting. It wasn't just yellow iron, it wasn't just Caterpillar. It was anything.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of, as bulldozers and backhoes.
It's long-term
tractors.
Yeah, it's long-term financing.
Okay.
And all the major banks have equipment finance arms. The Citicorp had a big one, Bank of America, of course John Deere Credit, Caterpillar Financial, all of these major
As an
companies.
Illinois guy, you're speaking my language.
Exactly. Peoria, Illinois, all those places. So what the leasing association was about. But I got this job, sort of to run the research department of the association, through the lobbyists, as I say, who heard of this opening in this trade organization, whose CEO at the time he was friendly with. So he says, "Hey, why don't you go talk to Mike? Because I hear he has a corporate government affairs job open." So yeah, okay, yeah, sure. Well, I met with Mike, the CEO and president of the leasing association. Well, it wasn't a government affairs job. It was running the research department and starting a state government relations organization within the association. And so I agonized over it. Well, I'm not going to be lobbying. I'm not going to be doing government relations, which is kind of what my forte is after having been on the Hill for all this time. I'm going to be doing something totally different. I'm going to be learning business. I'm going to be learning leasing and financing. It was a little daunting, but I took the job.
Okay.
And I started building a state government relations program. I started building out the research program. They did a lot of surveys, information gathering, to inform the members of the association about the status of the industry, the developments within the industry, to help them to do their job more successfully and more profitably. So we provided information, we provided, training, the typical, convention, all that kind of stuff. Magazine, the web was just being developed back then, the internet. So I took the job and then just kind of moved up. My first year at the association, I thought maybe I made a mistake.
Okay.
Because I was under the impression that I needed to know all this stuff in order to transmit it to the people who are members of the association, who are paying dues. So I was really very concerned that I'm not a leasing guy, I'm not even a finance guy, I'm a political science major. I knew everything there was to know on the Hill. I knew the legislative process, I knew how the Senate worked, I knew where to go, how to get it done. Now I'm in this totally different environment. Well, it then occurred to me after about the first year that it's not so much having the substance, and I'll learn what needs to be learned, but it's knowing where to go for the information. So in that respect, it was a lot like being on the Hill. You needed to know who was the resource, where was the resource, how to get this done, how to get from A to B. And that's why they hired me. I think the guy at the association hired me because I had worked on Capitol Hill. I'd worked with lobbyists, people from the state constituencies, are very similar to volunteers and members of a trade association who are corporate entities, but they join the association and pay dues because they want to make sure that we continue to advocate for them, not only in the state and federal governments, but provide information, communication for them to be able to stay on top of substantive issues that allow their companies to be profitable.
Well, it also sounds like you were hardwired not to be a micromanager because you literally couldn't be a micromanager.
Right.
In that
that's a really good point, because my first year I thought that I needed to be a micromanager. In the trade association on the Hill, it was different.
Yeah.
The environment was different, but in a trade association there were 25, 28 of us staff people, and I thought I had to do everything myself.
Sure.
Till it dawned on me, as I say, that wait a second, this is similar to the environment that I had come from, in that if I know where to go and how to get it, how to ask for it, that's half the battle. And then you become way less micromanaging. And then as my career developed, I became comfortable delegating. You can only do so much yourself. I mean, as you kind of,
only 8 to 24 working hours in a day.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And so then, moving up in the association was a lot like moving up in the Senate.
Yeah.
You had more responsibility, different responsibility. I used to love going to going to the Senate floor, and going to the cloakroom, and just kind of listening and watching, doing memos and doing analysis and research on particular issues that the senator needed to be briefed on. This wasn't his forte, right? He wasn't paying attention to labor issues or civil service issues.
Right.
Although civil service, a lot of civilians were on these bases,
sure,
in Fort Stewart and other places in Georgia. So he had to be aware of those, and he had to be briefed on those, but that wasn't his forte. His forte was national defense, the Defense Authorization Bill, foreign policy, PSI, Permanent Subcommittee on Investigation. He was on the Small Business Committee, those kinds of things. So it was kind of heady stuff, and it was very interesting to me to be able to immerse myself in an issue that that I thought he needed to know about. Mm-hmm. And some of it he cared a little bit about, and some of it he cared a lot about. He would always ask when you're briefing him on an issue, what do they think in Georgia? The substance is this, but also I'm not just going to go marching off and doing this because of this or this because of this. What are they saying in the state? So you sort of had to be close to what people were saying in the state and be
principled but still responsive.
Yeah, right, exactly. Exactly. So in that respect, it was similar, and you can learn an awful lot about life in getting along with people and not being a micromanager by working in the United States Senate.
Well, the 90s, you get there in the late 80s, and the 90s, this is the sum total of my knowledge of finance, but the deregulation of financial systems in the 90s, especially the late 90s with Graham Leach Bliley and interstate banking.
Yep.
How did that affect the business that you were involved in?
Well, interesting. At first, banking deregulation, Graham Leach Bliley, all of that, it was thought that there would be no place for equipment financing, that the rules had changed. Banks were going to not finance equipment because of a lot of reasons that are in some respect complicated and some not so complicated. But the business thrived. One of the things I always will never forget, I started in 1987 at the association. In 1986, Reagan enacted a tax reform act, a huge, revolutionary tax reform act. Well, in this tax reform act was a provision that eliminated an investment tax credit for leasing. So what we always wanted to do from a government perspective, from a policy perspective, is make sure that passive finance companies, like leasing companies, they may have owned the equipment, entitled the equipment, and legally were the owner of the equipment, but they didn't use the equipment. Let's think of a car lease. Right. The user of the equipment is the end user, is the business. So this was all commercial. So what we wanted to make sure was that there was a level playing field between a passive investor, a leasing company, investing in these leases, and the end user would be the obviously the operator of the equipment, and an owner user, the owner operator of the equipment. So we wanted to make sure that there was no disadvantage to the passive finance company, the leasing company. So that was always our level playing field principle. And banks over the period of time came in and out of leasing and financing, and there were a lot of reasons that they stayed in. Now, in fact, it's kind of interesting because they're exiting. Many banks are exiting equipment finance.
Are they exiting? Is that seeding the field to larger and larger operations and shops?
It's seeding it. Banks getting out is seeding the market to independent. So there's independent leasing and finance companies. They weren't just banks. They weren't just the captives, the John Deeres, the IBMs, the Caterpillars. There's this third segment, which are independents. So right now, the independents are the ones that are taking share from the banks as the banks are leaving. But the banks will be back. They come and they go. Right now, equipment finance.
Is this because of interest rates and
part
monetary
interest rates,
policy?
Yes. Part interest rates being as high as they are. Leasing and financing is not the core business of many of these banks. They're depository institutions.
So they're shifting to where they can see the greatest returns.
Right. They're stretched too thin. They're trying to consolidate, and
they don't want to get dinged by the FDIC for unprofitable sector.
Right. Even though in many of these banks, equipment finance was a huge profit center, but it wasn't the core of the bank. And it was a very unregulated part of the bank. I mean, bank is a tremendously regulated entity, but the equipment finance, I mean, leasing in itself there's no regulations. There's no, Title 556 of the code does not regulate leasing or lease financing. It's all about how a bank is regulated as a corporate entity, as to how it can operate. But the leasing and finance entity of most of these banks always made a lot of money, and they were very, very profitable and added to the bottom line of the bank. But the banks lately have consolidated. They've jettisoned their equipment finance company because they haven't performed as well. Interest rates are high. They still have to get money. I mean, these banks have to, equipment finance entities still have to get allocated funds from the parent. So in many cases, these interest rates are high and creating an unmanageable environment for some of these banks. So the independents are doing fine. But it vacillates. It goes, they come in, they come out, they come in. It's an extremely profitable business.
What was the effect of the pandemic on?
It was bad. It was very bad.
Not to make you relive the trauma, but I think it's really interesting for folks who may be interested in this topic.
Yeah, I was the CEO. I was a few years into my president and CEO gig at the association when the pandemic hit, and we lost a bunch of members. Membership dues suffered.
Sure.
Companies, the first thing that goes when things are not so rosy is their training, their travel, their expenses, and that's leasing and finance association is sort of a luxury. It's not something we absolutely need to survive, right? Although we always like to make sure we tell them that you need us to survive. So they would, membership was suffering. The association suffered. We lost a ton of money. The board of directors, who I answered to, always wants to be. They want to leave you alone in a lot of organizations when things are good. You run the organization. You have a staff. You do what you need to do.
Right.
But as soon as things get bad, which they did, all of a sudden, we're having every other week board meetings with the staff, the senior staff. What's our worst case scenario? Are we closing our doors? What's the impact on this program? What's the impact on that program? We got through it, and we stayed in business. The lights stayed on. The Great Recession, we had to let 5 people go. So the big calamity before the pandemic was the Great Recession in 07, 08. We had to let five people go, so we went from 30 people to 25 people. And I was the one who had to let those people go, which was a terrible thing. But we somehow made it through the pandemic. We were able to tighten expenses because revenues were not great. So we did as much as we possibly could with as much as we had, or less, and we got through it. So in 2000, after the pandemic, 2021, we had banner years. We came out of it, the association came out of it very well. The industry recovered. Companies always need equipment. And every company, every commercial business in the United States, it's $1 trillion industry, and everybody needs equipment. And so even companies that pulled back, and because of the pandemic, they weren't operating in full throttle, they still needed equipment. And so they needed leased equipment, financed equipment, because cash was so hard to come by. So they would look at, long-term obligations for their equipment just to keep things going. Now, if you're in the travel business, tourism, all those
Right.
airlines, they suffer.
Those sectors are quite different. Yeah.
Exactly. But for law firms, I mean, all of these, I shouldn't say that because I don't know. Most of these assets here, computers, telephone, handsets, are leased or financed. I mean, they're only 3-year. The life expectancy and the life cycle of a laptop is 3 years, 4 years. So why are you going to buy all these things? Then they're obsolete after 3 years, and now I got to go buy more. So the leasing and finance company, the finance company itself, will set up a program, lease all this equipment. When it comes off lease after 3 years, they'll take the equipment back and refresh it all. All of these laptops, all of the high-tech infrastructure. And so a lot of dentist office, doctor's offices, law firms, service entities, as well as industrial manufacturing, food service, all those, they all need equipment to operate. And so to finance that equipment makes a heck of a lot more sense than plunking down X hundreds of thousands of dollars to buy it all, and now you got it all sitting there when you've reached its life expectancy, and now you got to give it back. Then what happens? You got to do it all over again.
Especially when if you would like, in theory, to have these things rolling, so you're not replacing everything
right
at the same time.
Exactly.
You know, it's like the light bulbs when you buy your house.
That's exactly.
The first time you got to switch them out all at the same time.
That's right.
Interesting. So you've become pretty well versed with the life cycle of technology, of how these things go from sitting in front of me to repurposed and refurbished to sold off. I suppose scrapped for rare earth metals.
Yeah. Real quick story.
Yeah.
This was my very first 6 months at the Leasing and Finance Association. My boss says to me, this is to your point, my boss says to me, you should go talk to a bunch of leasing and finance company executives and learn the business. I'll set you up with a bunch of meetings in New York City. And you go spend 3 days in New York City, talk to these members about their business, and you'll learn an immense amount of what you need to know about this industry. So one of my appointments is with the State Street Bank in this is 40 years ago, and it's with the head of the equipment finance. So I get into this guy's office. I'm up on the 40th floor of this huge office building in downtown Manhattan, New York City. We sit down, we introduce ourselves, we talk, and we exchange some pleasantries. And I'm looking around, and there's all of these people at desks and terminals, and there's papers and shuffling all over the place. So this guy's explaining his business. His business is leasing and financing rail cars, container ships, aircraft. So we call large ticket. These are huge, multi-million-dollar assets, right? So I'm looking around. He's explaining this to me, and I'm thinking to myself, I didn't notice a big yard downstairs when I entered the building where they keep all these rail cars and container ships. I wonder where they keep all that stuff. Well, what a dummy. I had no idea.
Where do they keep them?
Like in downtown Manhattan, like where's all this equipment? I'm thinking, well,
there's got to be a warehouse somewhere.
There's got to be some place where he keeps these rail cars. No, this bank never wants to see this equipment again. They are basically doing the financing for the asset. They're not keeping it. It's not.
It's like, where's all the money at the bank? And it's like, well, there's some.
Right. Yeah, there's no inventory of rail cars. The rail cars are out.
They live on the ledger.
Yeah. It's paper. It's all paper-based. Well, that was an eye-opener for me.
Right.
And I was so happy that I didn't say to him, "Hey, where are you keeping all these rail cars?" Now, is it?
I probably thought it would be a joke if you did.
So anyway, you learn from talking to people. I'm a better listener than I am, although I think I'm doing more talking now than I've done in the 6 months that I've been retired. But I'm generally a better listener than I am a talker. And then that's all. To be successful, it seems to me, is to take advantage of the opportunity that you're given. Whether it's a networking, whether you're able to find a job. We have a son who's going through this right now. Network, talk to others, find out what there is to know about the job market, listen, be conscientious. Once you get that opportunity, make the heck out of it. Make as much as you can. If it's something that you feel you want to pursue, which is what I did in Senator Nunn's office, I really enjoyed the environment. So I was just really determined to learn all I can, to be as diligent as I could. And it was a tremendous social environment as well. And the same thing with the Leasing and Finance Association. You just learn, keep your eyes and ears open, ask questions, have curiosity, and if you're committed to what it is you're doing, and you're with an organization and a cause that you think is worthwhile, then just keep at it, And
well, what would your advice be to people? I don't want to say we live in a more cynical age in terms of government service or the good that people can do in government, or if there's any point to it at all. But what would your advice be to young people, maybe not so young people, who are thinking about a career on the Hill or in government service?
I think it's absolutely invaluable. I have folks, their kids, who come to me for advice and ask, what's it like working on the Hill? I'm thinking I'd want to be a staff person on the Hill. And I tell them, they're essentially what I've just kind of described. You will learn so much. You're not going to get rich, at least not early on, and probably not even after that, if you stay on the Hill. But government service is tremendous. What you will learn in government, what you'll learn about public policy, doing, making people's lives better, listening to what it is that makes them tick, what are their needs, what are their wants. I mean, that's basically what a member of Congress does,
right?
Is try to make the lives of their constituents better and make sure that the country stays strong and stable. So there is no better experience for me than to work in government, whether it's on the agency side, or whether it's on the legislative side in Congress, whether the House or the Senate. I just happen to be extremely fortunate that the stars lined up and I started working for Sam Nunn, and then things after that just took off. And as a result of having this wonderful opportunity with such a prestigious statesman like Sam Nunn, I was able to really take advantage of that and use that in my next move. The interesting thing was, when I retired, one of my friends asked Senator Nunn to do a video, congratulations for me, right? So we had this retirement party in December, and lo and behold, they turn on the video, and Senator Nunn's sitting at his desk, and he's congratulating me on my retirement from the Equipment Leasing and Finance Association. I was very taken aback. I really didn't. It was a surprise. I didn't expect that he was going to do that. Just a really solid guy, great experience working on the Hill. It has been an absolutely fantastic experience. The only thing I would say, in terms of, and you know this as well as anybody in this town and beyond, the politics is so different now than it was back in the 70s, back in the 80s, when the Sam Nunns and the Dick Lugers used to get along together, used to co-sponsor legislation. The Sam Nunns and Pete Domenicis used to get along together, even though it was a Democrat and a Republican. Things got done. And it's kind of trite, and you hear a lot about that now. Well, it's not the way it used to be, which is true. Things got done, and politics is the art of the compromise. It's being able to say, well, you get a half loaf, and I'll get a half loaf, and I didn't get the whole loaf, you didn't get the whole loaf, but we got enough to make us happy and to make what we think is important worthwhile.
Right.
That is so different now. I mean, just from everything, and it's permeated. I don't know where it started, if it's the citizenry to the government or the government to the citizenry, but it's even neighborhoods are polarized.
Oh yeah.
For everything. You know, I mean, you're either on this side of the aisle or you're that side of the aisle. You're this kind of a guy, or you're going to vote for this guy, or you're going to vote for this kind of guy, and that kind of puts you in the bucket. You're over here. Oh, you're a Biden Democrat. Okay, now you're a Trump Republican. Oh, you're over there. You're over there, and we can't even talk to each other because we're going to get in an argument. And it shouldn't be like that, and it never was like that. I mean, you know, I told the story, the thing about the Mac Mattingly. I mean, it was sort of like, okay, this Republican. I mean, the Democrat had been in the Senate for years in Georgia, and now this Republican businessman is now not pushed out. Senator Talmadge left, and now this guy. I mean, a guy like Talmadge, who was as status was huge in Georgia, and historically and traditionally. And then Mac Mattingly comes in. It wasn't like this, oh my God, we can't work with these people. This is awful, this is awful. And it was a little bit of kind of feeling out what's this like, it's different. But people got along, and things got done. Legislation was enacted, and people lived, and people lived. They didn't die.
Right. Well, it seems like, you know, the only time that the Congress, especially the Senate, seems to function is when there's an emergency and you absolutely, gun to your head, have to do something, or everything will collapse.
Yeah.
And you know, I don't know, maybe if Ralph Petta and I had the answers to that, we'd be very rich men. But
yeah, I know. And it to a certain extent it was that way, but the urgencies seem to be so many more acute now.
Yeah.
You know, back then there were still deadlines, and you know, you sort of moved up into the dead. The big thing now is the debt ceiling is this huge cataclysmic event,
which was never
the debt ceiling got enacted like just it was a voice vote. I mean, there was really no big deal. These days it's life and death. You know, it's craziness, and running up against the deadline. Now it's January. Oh, now we've got to wait until we get to January before anything gets done, and now there's going to be all this consternation.
It is sort of crazy to think that the precipitating act that forced out the first, Speaker McCarthy, was passing a continuing resolution to fund the government.
Right, exactly.
like it wasn't some scandalous thing or a failure to do something.
Right.
It was a CR. It wasn't even a full budget.
No, and continuing resolutions occur all the time, and and what happens is what was enacted was the exact same thing that pushed him out in the first place. So what got accomplished by him leaving? But that's an example of this unbelievable polarization that occurs here and throughout the government. And you know, you wonder, as civil servants are being, you know, they're really being put upon. I mean, the Trump administration, they try to change the status of many of these civil servants so that they could really have more of a political posture than not. And you wonder what's going to happen if that were to occur again. I mean, there are very, very serious-minded people and agencies that are out to do good. And this idea that, you know, there's this deep state and these bad people that are just trying to undermine the government, you know, gosh. And you know, it's funny, Randy and I, we were playing golf a couple weeks ago. We were coming back from playing golf, and we got talking about the Senate. And I said, I wonder how many of those guys are still living. And so we're in the car coming back, and he pulls up and he goes through the 100 former senators, and where none is in those living. The senators are still living, and I mean, they're a dying breed. Obviously, that's the nature of things,
sure.
Right? but it's amazing. Some of those folks are still around. Gosh, Sam Nunn's are still. He's 85 now, and I guess he's doing okay, which is good. But there's fewer and fewer of the people who were around when he was here.
I saw Pat Leahy a couple months ago.
Yeah.
But yeah, right.
It's amazing, and they just. I don't know if it's me, and my bias, but there are people in the Senate, just the Senate, for the House is a whole different animal, but people in the Senate that I couldn't even. I mean, if you told me that this person, he or she, was a U.S. senator, it's like, well, what did they accomplish? What did they do? I was really surprised how young Ossoff is. I mean,
he's like younger than I am.
Yeah,
he's younger than I am.
I was thinking, okay, no, he's like mid-40s or something. And he's been there, what, 4 years?
Yeah, 2021.
Yeah,
he was sworn in 2021.
Amazing. Now, I really don't know much about, most of what you hear about is Warnock. He gets more publicity. Randy and I were talking about Warnock. There was Searsucker Suit Day. I don't know if you read Searsucker Suit Day.
Senator Warnock has some bespoke suits. He is stylish.
He is stylish.
I envy his wardrobe.
Yeah.
His style is impeccable. Every once in a while, if I fly up to DC on a Monday, better than even chance I'll fly up with either one of the senators. Yeah. And Senator Ossoff and I are roughly the same age, and I'll say hello and everything. But he could be somebody. He could be a staffer.
Right.
If you did not know who he was, you could mistake him for a senior staffer. Very erudite, very well spoken. Mm-hmm. Senator Warnock gets on the plane. Impeccable suit.
Yeah.
Very straight laced.
Yeah.
Has a gravitas.
Yeah.
Perhaps.
Yeah.
But that's what the interesting thing about the Senate is. You can be successful, or and you can do it your own way. Senator Nunn's style was not Senator Talmadge's style.
Right.
Was not Senator Mattingly's style, or Wyche Fowler, who was much more of a hail fellow, well met, of. I don't want to say corny, but he was much more outgoing publicly.
Yeah.
So maybe that's the interesting about the Senate is, for a long time it worked like that, and it worked.
Well, there's 100 of them, so I mean, it'd be boring if everybody was the same. I mean, you got 100 men and women up there, and they all have their own style. People have been there forever, and people who are just new to the institution, and that's what makes it such an interesting place. It's just a fantastic experience. Anybody who would ask me about the experience, what's it like, I would say, if you have an opportunity, either the House or the Senate, take it, because you're going to learn an immense amount about people and how to get things done, and it's just a great place to be, a great place to start.
Well, and it seems, just to wrap this up, it seems like one of the real strengths is how you're able to, and I don't want to make this sound like it's devious or you're conniving to do this, but you build out a network of contacts and friends who, in later years, you can not just help them, or they can be a help to you. You can be a help to them, and that is a fantastic way, because you make friends and contacts from all over the country. It's not just your town, your county, your state, necessarily. So
that's exactly right. Networking is so important, not only here but anywhere.
Right.
It
seems like a trite point to make.
Right.
But
you still got to take advantage of the opportunity and turn it into something that's hopefully successful.
Right.
So there's nothing wrong with that. But the interesting thing is, having said that, my story is one of, there was no networking. I mean, the way I got the job with Senator Nunn, as I say, is my resume got plucked in the personnel office.
Did you ever find out why or how it was you and not?
They just wanted some, I don't know, they wanted some young guy. I don't know.
Right.
I had your standard issue resume.
Right.
Where I went to school, where I went to college. Well, here I am. I'm a New Yorker.
Right. You would think if it had been plucked, it would have been from somebody from the New York delegation.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And everybody that I worked with on the Hill was from the state, was from Georgia. And some of my best buddies working in Sam Nunn's office, they were all I'm from the state.
I'm racking my brain to think of at least, especially those early staffers.
Right.
From the first couple terms.
Yeah. Matt Corey, Kirby Thompson, Ethelyn Simpson, Cheryl Davis. Everybody.
Was Randall Morris there when you? I guess Randall would have been an intern, and then you probably ran into him when he was doing. He was a state guy in Savannah, so you probably would have had interaction with him at that point. But I know he moved over to Congressman Ginn's office.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
that's where it is.
Remember the name. The interns had we can end on this note.
Yeah.
The interns had a wonderful, major responsibility in the office. Now, every summer, there'd be a pack of interns that would come in, and they were pretty well connected, their families, and nun families, all that kind of stuff. Well, these interns, no matter who they were, what family they came, how much money they had, or whatever their daddies did, their responsibility was to go in the shadow of the Washington Monument and reserve the softball field for us for the night's softball game. So they would go out there with the cooler of beer at like 2 p.m. Right now, they weren't getting paid. No one's paying them. So they'd go out there with their cooler of beer. Wasn't like this. The poor guys, we'd have to go rescue them with the EMT. They would reserve right back then. The Washington Monument was a huge area.
By reserving is literally, you mean they literally had to sit there and be like, "This is our field."
This is our field.
Oh my God!
They weren't. There wasn't any lines. There wasn't any backstops. There was none of that. It's like, okay, you put the cooler here, you put your towel here or whatever, and this is your field. Now your right fielder is standing probably 10 feet from the left fielder of the other team. Of the other diamond, but you got your little placer. And it would always be the province of an intern to go and stake out that field. So they performed a valuable service.
That's right.
In the U.S. Senate.
That's right.
Some of them are now judges, probably retired attorneys.
Sure.
I couldn't even tell you.
But they all start somewhere.
You got to start somewhere. That's right.
Well, Ralph, thank you so much for taking the time, and this has been a fascinating discussion. I learned a lot. I can tell you that much. But thank you again.
Oh, you're welcome.
On behalf of the Richard B. Russell Library and the University of Georgia, thank you for your time.
I enjoyed it. Thank you, Ashton.